And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Let's go back there to the White House. Like I said before the break, I want to dive into this interview former President Joe Biden gave to the New York Times over the weekend. Biden saying he had orally granted all the pardons and commutations issued at the end of his term, calling President Trump and other Republicans, quote unquote, liars for claiming his aides had used an Autopen to do so without his authorization. Fox News correspondent Madeline Rivera has more details.
Former President Biden breaking his silence over his use of an Autopen device to issue pardons at the end of his time in office. President Trump and Republicans have jumped on it as a major scandal, saying it raises serious questions about who was in charge at the Biden White House.
I guarantee he knew nothing about what he was signing. I guarantee it.
President Biden firing back at his critics over the weekend in an interview with the New York Times, saying he used an Autopen to sign the clemency warrants because there were so many of them, but that he, quote, made every decision. In response to Republicans questioning his mental sharpness, Biden said they're liars. They know it. The former president says pardons of his staff and members of his family were meant to protect them from politically motivated prosecutions by the Trump administration. Some of his former staffers have been coming to his defense.
Of course, it makes no sense that he would physically sign 4,000 documents. What's important here is that he says, I made the decisions. What he's saying is the Autopen just executed those actions.
Last week, the former president's doctor testified on Capitol Hill in a deposition to the House Oversight Committee, but his answers didn't shed much light after he pleaded the fifth to nearly every question.
I think that this adds more fuel to the fire, that there was a cover-up.
This week, former First Lady Jill Biden's senior advisor Anthony Bernal is expected to appear before the House Oversight Committee for a closed deposition. In Washington, Madeline Rivera, Fox News.
Madeline, thanks so much. All right, let's talk about this story with our friends there at 24 Site, Tom Lobianco, and at the Washington Examiner, Kaelen Deese. You guys, thanks for being with us here. Hope you had a good weekend. I guess, Tom, I'll start with you. For our viewers, what's an Autopen? What is that? Is that just a DC thing or something else?
Oh, it's one of the great wonders of the Trump era of American politics is how deep in the weeds we get with American history. I was actually just reading up on this, and a very nice piece from NPR. Apparently, it's used for, if you think about signing thousands of documents, it is a automatic machine which writes in ink, and it has been used by presidents before. It's been used by university presidents, administrators, and whatnot. Typically, it's going back years and years and years, decades past. LBJ says Carter and Nixon have used it before. And I should note, as a good Marylander, it's made by a Maryland company.
Oh.
So, yeah.
So that was my next question. Have other presidents used it? You answered that. And I think, and maybe our viewers have forgotten, I no doubt probably have, that at the end of his term, his single term there, Biden had issued over 4,000 commutations and pardons over the course of that 4 years, the most of any president. And our viewers can fact check me there, but I looked that up here. But this was an interview in the New York Times. Kaelen, Biden said that he had his staff use an Autopen for the warrants because he had granted clemency to so many people. The Autopen was used in all on 25 pardon and commutation warrants from last December to this January. Some of the individual warrants included large batches of names because they all fell into the same broad policy category, like reducing the sentences of nonviolent drug offenders who met the standards Biden had established here. So how is this all going down? What is the reaction? This is in lieu of Biden taking a pen and signing these things with his own hand, right?
Right. And I think that if you ask most people, especially Republicans on the Hill, they would probably ask you the question, why would Biden even go out and tell the New York Times, give him a 10-minute interview to talk to him about all of this? But I would say that it really shows a lot of confidence over there from the Biden camp, that they think that they had a thorough created formula to use the Autopen to the point where they're trying to posture as not necessarily as nervous as some Republicans might think they would be especially in the weeks that we've been going through this investigation. Now, I do think that where they are opening themselves up for a little bit of trouble is the fact that we've basically been given a window into this very convoluted system in which aides would be basically passing information from one aide to another, to the point where there's basically, this multifaceted, group of people that are, finally getting this to the final stages for, signing via the Autopen. So I think that they're leaving themselves open, at least in part from the political side, where as Republicans like James Comer are going through these interviews in the coming days, especially with Anthony Bernal, they're going to be able to ask them questions, especially related to the way that, say, Chief of Staff Zients was basically signing off on the use of the Autopen, and how there were basically lower aides that were creating blurbs sort of as the justification for using the Autopen. It creates a system in which now the Republican investigators are going to be asking them direct questions about this.
So, I mean, to me, it seemed like because Biden did this interview in the New York Times, it was over the phone, that he wanted to explain himself, or at least get out ahead of it. I think that's kind of the point you were intimating. The New York Times says this: Biden said, quote, "I made every decision," but according to the New York Times, these clemency warrants that were reviewed by the Times show that the Biden White House had a process to establish. Biden had orally made decisions in meetings before the staff secretary, her name Stephanie Feldman, who managed use of the Autopen, would have clemency records put through the signing device here. So, Tom, do you think I have that right, politically speaking, that Biden wanted to explain, wanted to clarify, wanted to get out ahead of this story?
Feels that way. I mean, as you know, as we've noted before, certainly uncharacteristic of how he was during the campaign, his reelection bid. When he was in the White House, he certainly didn't call reporters on cell phones. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know it directly myself, but I suspect there's there's a realization that they probably need to talk about this. I mean, as Time stories go, props to the New York Times for getting that. It's incredibly detailed, and Kaelen noted this a second ago. I mean, my God, this is arcane. This is the type of thing I'd look to put into a book, to pad out a few pages. All right. But it's important. All right. These are, yes, the nonviolent offenders, but if you look at the universe of pardons and what Republicans have gone after Biden and continue to go after Biden for, it's the bigger names. It's Hunter Biden. It's Anthony Fauci. So it obviously incredibly important, perhaps meriting this, where we are right now, down in the weeds with, notes and whatever oral blurbs from the secretary to the council to the president, whatever.
Live picture there at the White House. And so I have to ask this. Because I was struck by the fact that, Biden is taking the time to call the New York Times, to your point, Tom, something that I was seeing on X over the weekend. He never did during the 4 years that he was in the White House. He never had a one-on-one interview with the New York Times. I was struck by that here. And Kaelen, to you, and maybe this is a charitable explanation, but this is, logistically speaking, the use of an Autopen to save a president time, right? Is that too charitable of an explanation?
No, I think precisely that's the point of an Autopen's use. And that's why the system in which they created for using the Autopen really doesn't make sense as far as getting things done. I mean, it's almost as if, you could say this was a system that you could ask a LLM or ChatGPT to sort of, hey, I'm going to give you a list of names and make sure it fits in with this criteria. It's like, I mean, I guess you could, argue that the way that it was working with the aides, they were trying to make sure that all of these names that were pardoned, some of them, very violent offenders, fit in with this criteria. But it makes a lot of, people puzzled whenever they see that, something that's supposed to be so, for the use of ease, being made so convoluted. And I'll say this as a point to sort of move it forward a little bit. it's very odd that we're getting this information from the New York Times about all of these emails and discourse that was happening whenever the House Oversight Committee has been investigating all of these former Biden aides. We haven't, at least as far as what they've intimated from their discussions, we haven't seen anything as far as these conversations go. And the New York Times says that there's thousands more. So I find it very interesting that the House investigators didn't didn't cut to the chase on this part yet. And I think that it'll be very likely moving forward that those investigators will try to get access to some of those NARA archive emails in order to sort of press this issue even more so. I can't help but think that they're going to focus their attention next on looking at some more of these emails that the New York Times didn't even talk about.
Yeah, Tom, let's do big picture here. We're nearing the 1 year mark since Biden withdrew from the 2024 election. That was July the 21st, 2024 here. That's in a matter of several days. Is it valid to ask the question now in the wake of all of these kind of tell-all books about, what Biden's mental acuity was at the time in the last 2 years of his 1 year term, about whether or not he was up to the job, about whether or not he actually could have, if he were to have stayed in the race and won the election, served 4 more years as president here. Those questions are connected to the conversation we're having right now. That's the entire reason we're talking about the Autopen, right, Tom?
Yeah, and I would know one of the co-authors on that piece is Tyler Pager, who is a co-author of the newest 2024 recap out. Great book by Tyler and Josh Dawsey and Isaac Arnstorff, which just published. And again, to the point of how Biden and the Biden White House operated, part of the reason that we're hearing about this is because they weren't engaging at all. I mean, they weren't engaging before on the these books. Really left it to again, just a repeated problem for the Democrats. Left it open to Trump and the Republicans to craft the narrative. But that is really the centerpiece of so many of these recaps of what happened last year. And if you boil it down, depending on where you sit on the political spectrum, if you are a Democrat, and I think our friend Chris Eliza has pointed this out very well, there's kind of mutual outrage from the partisans here. If you're a Democrat, one of the reasons you get so angry about this is the idea that his infirmity is and the cover up of that infirmity is what ultimately put Trump in the White House. That debate performance, which we were covering at the time,
right?
That is what led to it. And if you're a Republican in a Trump MAGA base, the anger comes from that there was a cover up, there might be something more sinister at play.
Yeah.
But it really, not a lot of Biden fans out there right now.
So Kaelen, I want to follow up on that question I asked Tom, because we've been talking about, and Tom gave us examples. Other presidents have used Autopens. But the reason we're talking about Biden's use of the Autopen is because it's directly connected and linked to the questions about his mental acuity, his alleged, physical and mental senility while in office here. That's where Republicans are taking this, right?
Yeah, Republicans think that there must have been something deeper to the fact that he was using an Autopen, especially as it ramped up, as we're now getting more clear confirmation of in his final months in office. And something that's very interesting is that Biden's use of the Autopen stems far back into the early days of his presidency, whenever he was signing proclamations at first. It really wasn't until, I believe, the first year of his presidency, I believe on a trip to Israel, where he used the Autopen kind of as it is usually intended for, which is to sign legislation while you're, away from, the office. But as it turns out, we began to see later into Biden's presidency, there were days whenever he was even at the White House where he was having the Autopen being signed. That's according to information that's been obtained and released from the Oversight Project, formerly part of the Heritage Foundation. But they uncovered on at least seven different occasions, there were times whenever Biden was working at the Oval Office, but he still had things signed with Autopen. Therein lies where Republicans start to get suspicious. because they think to themselves, kind of like we were just mentioning before, if it's supposed to be something that is convenient and for ease, well, one can make also an argument that it's just as easy to use your own hand to sign a signature on something, especially if you're at work that day. So I think that that's where people start, especially Republicans, start to look at the issue and wonder to themselves, was there something else happening here? Were there more aides that were doing this, perhaps unbeknownst to the president? And I think that that's where, especially Republicans, like, say in Comer's camp, want to see the Justice Department look into this as well. And I'll say this, last week, whenever we saw Biden's doctor plead the fifth, there was a bit of a discussion about whether, I remember Senator Mike Lee from Utah was asking, why don't we just give Biden's doctor immunity if he's going to plead the fifth? Well, I think that there's an equal interest in seeing that no immunization is given to anyone who's interviewed in this process, because the Justice Department probe is that serious, and they don't want to foreclose any opportunities to perhaps bring them to a grand jury if that ever gets to that point.
Okay, Tom, just lastly here on this question, because a lot of people, especially Democrats, over the weekend were essentially saying, why would former President Biden step on this major internecine war going on in MAGA over Jeffrey Epstein? Why would he do that? Why would he kind of step on that news cycle and generate his own here about the Autopen? But is it valid to ask, to Kaelen's point, to bring some of these staffers, especially Stephanie Feldman, who was, responsible for the deployment, the use of the Autopen, to just explain either in closed door or open door settings whether or not she or other staffers were doing this without the president's authorization. Biden says they weren't, but we deserve to know that question. What if they were? Right, Tom?
I mean, it's a big story if you have rogue staff out there operating.
Yeah.
I mean, that, we have that right now, too. I mean, we have Hegseth, talking out of school. And then we have Trump announcing today that we're sending missiles to Ukraine.
Right, we just did a segment on that, yeah.
Again, that's the reason it's a big deal when you have people talking out of school like they shouldn't and making decisions. If that happened, I mean, yeah, if a junior staffer was the one that pardoned Anthony Fauci, I guarantee you that would be a huge story if that happened. I don't know. We don't know. It's kind of.
It's a big if. It's a huge if.
Tack it on to the Epstein thing. We could be talking about this 6 years from now, right? We could be looking at Zapruder film of Autopens.
Kaelen, lastly here, where does this go now? What will you be following on the Autopen question?
Oh, well, I think that, and Kaelen, I'm sorry, I want to step on you there, Kaelen. I'll make this real quick. What the House Republicans do with it, and I'll be reading the Examiner certainly to see how this goes. Again, it's up to see, and then also, as he noted, what the Justice Department does with it.
Kaelen.
Yeah, I think definitely all eyes should be trained on where, especially the interviews with specifically Jeff Zients go. I know that there's going to be also some interviews in the future with Andrew Bates, who is very key to the White House, Ian Sams, people like that. I mean, the House Republicans seem to believe that these interviews are going to be way more important, perhaps even more so now that this information is out there from the New York Times, and they have some fuel to go with whenever they want to ask these questions. And I think that, like I said earlier, these NARA emails, records are going to be important going forward as well.
All right. Kaelen Deese, Tom Lobianco, always good to see you guys. Talk soon. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Okay, in the meantime here, just want to round out the hour with yet another major story we were especially